Welcome to Commission Ed, the Air Force Officer Podcast. Here we explore the training and development of America's leaders in the application of air power and the profession of arms. The views expressed are those of the hosts and do not reflect the official policy or position of the United States Air Force, Department of Defense, or the U.S. government.
Welcome back to another episode of Commission Ed, the Air Force Officer Podcast. I am Colin Slade.
And I'm Reed Gann, and we're your hosts for Commission Ed. All right, thanks for joining us again, our loyal and fantastic audience. This is the second part of the Matt Folks interview. Last week, we brought you his experience as a cadet there at Brigham Young University, his tale of woe on how he became a space operator, and how he turned that around to be a fantastic career doing space lift and then followed up with a job doing instructor duty. Last week, we introduced the fact that his story is multifaceted, and he then left active duty, became a student of law. That's what we're going to bring you, is that part of the episode this week, in addition to some other thoughts about how the GI Bill work.
Yeah, this is a really important interview for anybody who is interested in using their GI Bill benefits, because that is, by and large, one of the most important benefits that you will earn as a veteran of the armed forces.
So much so that following this episode, our next week's episode will be a toolbox episode where we will get into the nitty-gritty, all the ins and outs about this incredible benefit that we've been blessed to receive as members who have served in the armed forces. And with that, we're going to turn it over to part 2 of our interview with Matt Folks.
Well, good. Okay, so now you finish telling your story. Let's find out how Captain Matthew Folks turned into Matt.
Okay, that sounds great. I'm excited about this. I feel really strongly about talking about life on the other side. It's funny, when you're on active duty, you're surrounded by all these people who are still on active duty. And so even though statistically, I don't know what, 20% of people who commission make an entire career out of it, when you're looking to separate, there's no one around you who has done it. So you're looking around and everybody's like, that's a horrible idea. What are you doing? Or like, are you sure? So it's really a strange experience deciding, you know what? This is the time in my career that I'm going to separate and pursue this other thing, because you're surrounded by people who have purposefully not made that decision.
Right. You're not going to be an officer forever, even if you go the full 20 or 30 years. At some point, everybody takes the uniform off. That transition is going to look a little bit different for each person. But to your point, while you are in it, you're not surrounded by people who have done it. And so they are not able to offer you any sort of advice or encouragement, really.
I mean, but literally, like, even the logistics of doing that, like, okay, I'm getting out of the Air Force. Nobody knows how to do it. It's like the first time it's ever been done anywhere. Like the personnel office, they don't deal with as many officers even. And so they're like, is your enlistment up? And you're like, I'm an officer. That's not even a thing. And so like, it's crazy. Like when you decide, like, I think I want to get out, like there's really not very many people who know even how it works. It's a really strange experience.
Yeah. Okay. Well, lead us through your own personal version of it. How did you get out? Well, first of all, why did you choose to get out? And then give us some of the more salient points of your experience actually making the transition.
Okay. So taking it back to when I was an undergrad, I took a class in communications law, and it was taught by an adjunct professor who was a lawyer who I'm still in touch with. And I did really well in the class. I was really interested in the material. And I thought, you know what? I think I want to be a lawyer. And at this point, I'm already committed through ROTC. I may have even had my career field selected at that time. There is a program called the Educational Delay Program, where the Air Force, if you apply and you qualify, they will give you their blessing for you to pay for your own legal degree for the opportunity to apply, and maybe they will let you be a JAG after you're done with law school. And I have a friend who did this, and I thought about it. But at this point, between ROTC and the time that I spent on my mission, I had been planning on becoming an officer for 6 years. And the thought of spending another 3 years going to law school, thinking about and planning on becoming an officer, I thought, you know what, I want to go active duty. And so I decided not to apply for the educational delay program. There also is a very limited funded legal education program that's available for active duty service members in other career fields. They can apply, and if they're selected, the Air Force will pay for them to go within a certain limit to a law school. And so I thought, oh, I can just apply for that later. So all that just to say that I knew that I was interested in going to law school at one point. If I wanted to stay in my career field, I think I would have been happy doing it. But I knew that law school was on my radar. It's something I wanted to do. I took the LSAT my junior year at some point. And so it was always something I wanted to do. So when I went on active duty, it was in the back of my mind. I did apply to the funded legal education program, and I was not selected for the funded legal education program, which, the years that I applied, I wanted to say they had between 2 and 5 people who were selected. So I understand that it's competitive and I didn't get it, but I will say it was disappointing. I mean, it's hard when you're really gung-ho about something. A lot of people, they're like, I'm going to be a regional affairs strategist or a foreign area officer. Either their career field tells them, well, that's great that you want to do that, but we're not going to let you even apply. Or just that application cycle, it's tough and they don't get picked up for it, or they weren't stratted in their last OPR. So I wasn't selected for the funded legal education program, but in the process, the way that the Air Force does it, you have to apply to law schools separately from the program. So you're applying to law schools, not even knowing whether or not you're going to be able to go. And which is probably something that adds to the disappointment, because here I am filling out all these applications. I'm paying applications fees. You get acceptance letters. Like, I got scholarship offers. I was like, this is amazing. And then the Air Force says, sorry, no dice, no feedback. Just, we had a lot of competitive applicants. You weren't selected. So then you send an email out to all these schools and you say, unfortunately, I'm, unable to attend at this time. And then at that point, I knew that I still wanted to go, but I had a commitment. So I took the LSAT again. I did a lot better. I applied to different law schools. And at this point, I was accepted to some top 10 law school programs. And I thought, for sure, they're going to select me for this legal education program. I just got into the University of Virginia. And then they didn't select me for that program. So I'm sitting there. I have an acceptance to a top 10 program. And I want to go to law school. I'm at the training squadron. And I call the personnel center guy. And I'm like, hey, personnel center guy, I want to go to law school, but I have some time left on my service commitment because I used tuition assistance to work on my MBA. And I was like, this isn't a big deal, right? I'll just pay back the money. It was like $250 a credit hour, and I used it for however many credit hours. And he was like, yeah, that's not how this works at all. So at this point, I find this out, and I thought I was disappointed. But then when I looked at it, I was like, okay. So as it sits right now, I can't separate. I'm accepted to a great law school. I have 2 more years, but I'm in a job that I love. I'm getting paid what I think is a very fair wage to do a job that is fun, and I get 30 days of vacation per year. And the other thing that's interesting, and I guess we should probably talk a little bit more about the GI Bill aspect of it, but where I was in my career, if I had separated at that time, I would have only qualified for part of the GI Bill. Whereas I did the math, my 2 years that I had left in my commitment put me within 2 weeks beyond the point in time where I would qualify for the 100% of the post 9/11 GI Bill benefits, which, fast forwarding a little bit, the benefits that I received going to law school topped maybe $250,000. worth of benefits. And so had I separated when I thought I wanted to and done that thing, or even if I'd been accepted for the funded legal education program, I probably wouldn't have been able to go to some of the schools that I had the opportunity to because of the tuition caps that they had. So in the end, I was able to stay at a base that I loved, in the house that I owned, working a job that was awesome and a perfect fit for me, and building up my GI Bill benefits. And so that's how that worked for me.
So what you're saying is that the bureaucracy and the policy actually helped you.
I'm telling you, man, dude, it was awesome. This is a ridiculous story. You know, your mileage may vary, but I'd been accepted to the University of Virginia, and they're super pro vet there, awesome school. And so they let me defer my seat for 2 years. And then because I was already accepted to a great school that I knew I would be happy at, I had been waitlisted at Harvard Law School. And I was like, you know what? I've got 2 years. I'm going to take the LSAT again. I'm going to work on my application. I'm going to apply at the very early part of the application window. And so about a year and a half later, I applied only to Harvard Law School, and getting the voicemail saying I was accepted to Harvard Law School was probably one of the coolest experiences ever. So it gave me the opportunity to apply again, and I was accepted to Harvard Law School a few months before I separated.
Awesome. Okay, before we get to your Harvard Law experience, let's go back a little bit and you peel the onion on why you had to spend that additional 2 years in the Air Force and how that all relates to your ROTC time, the scholarship that you had there, what it takes to qualify for GI Bill benefits. Let's peel that back for our audience.
Okay, so I love using the government's money to go to school. It's awesome, right? So I had my ROTC scholarship that covered tuition, and you got a housing stipend, which at the time seemed like a ton of money. But then I found out that other schools are much more expensive than BYU.
Yeah.
So anyway, I had most of my school paid for through ROTC. But while I was on active duty, every officer is bullied into getting a master's degree, even though within 6 years, the Air Force is going to make you get a master's degree through their own program. So that aside, it's just a thing, right? Everybody's supposed to get a master's degree, even if the official line has changed. It's what everybody says. So that didn't bother me. You know, school's fine. I love school, obviously. So I looked into programs that I could do remote coursework. And basically, I started looking into MBA programs. I was like, okay, what is the MBA program that I can get where if people see it on my resume, they won't say, oh, you went to internet college. So I looked into programs that were both inexpensive and looked like they were legitimate programs. And Oklahoma State is very military friendly. They have a lot of active duty military members who do their remote coursework, and it's very inexpensive. They give a discount to veterans. When I started, it was actually equal to the amount of money you could get through tuition assistance. And so a little bit about tuition assistance. It's awesome. For enlisted members, if I'm correct, it doesn't add anything to their service commitment, which is amazing. They should always be taking classes for free, like in, I don't know, wine tasting or something. Who cares? But for me, I was able to get my MBA for, I mean, I didn't take a loan. It had to have been less than $10,000 out of pocket, maybe less than $5,000 out of pocket, like incredible. So I used tuition assistance. It paid for almost everything, but tuition assistance adds to your service commitment 2 years from the last day of the last class for which you used tuition assistance. And so in theory, if you start out as a brand new second lieutenant and you get an MBA within 2 years, even if you had a 4-year service commitment, it runs concurrently, so it doesn't add anything to your service commitment. But for me, I didn't finish my last class of my MBA until right around the 5-year mark of my time in service. And so that put my expectation out to 7 years. So that's a little bit about tuition assistance. The only other thing I will say is make sure you do your paperwork on time, because if you're like, oh, I'll just turn it in once the class starts or whatever, they are really anal about that. So you will not be reimbursed for your tuition assistance stuff. But tuition assistance, anybody who doesn't take advantage of it is a fool. I mean, you get it's $250 a credit hour, and you can do two classes at a time, essentially. So it's like they're giving you $1,500 every 4 months or 6 months or whatever. It costs you nothing. It's awesome.
Yeah. And just to reemphasize that point, just in case it wasn't clear the first time, the commitment that you incur from using tuition assistance starts as soon as you finish that class. Even if you have another commitment already in place, the active duty service commitment from using tuition assistance runs concurrently with your active duty service commitment from commissioning.
Right. So there are academy grads who have a 5-year service commitment who will start working on a master's degree shortly after they commission. And some of them are able to work it out where I know a guy who he was an academy grad who knew he wasn't a lifer in the military. And he finished his MBA from, I want to say Indiana, which is like a top 20 MBA program. And he was able to finish it and then have enough time play out where I don't think he did more than one assignment. He finished his 5 years and he was done, and he had an MBA from a top program, and he went to work for a consulting firm or something.
Yeah, that's awesome. The other thing that we should say about tuition assistance is that in order to be eligible for it, you have to be in a degree program that is accredited. Tuition assistance is not for like a vocational school or certificate program in like welding or something like that.
Correct. Yeah, I had, this has nothing to do with anything. There is a sexology school in
Nice.
San Francisco, California. And one of the guys I worked with, he got a doctorate in sexology, whatever that is. I don't know. You can look it up. But he was always really cagey about whether or not it was covered, but I'm pretty sure it was not covered by TA because its accrediting body was essentially itself. So I don't think that one counts. But if you want to get an MBA or you want to get a master's in whatever, I mean, some programs you can do faster than others. Like there are classic military master's programs that you can get from like Trident University, International University, or AMU is a classic one, or not Phoenix. There are a handful that people use. So some are more common than others. Oklahoma State, a lot of military members do. It's probably less common overall than like AMU or Trident.
Yeah. So you used tuition assistance. It pushed out your active duty service commitment. But along those lines, you were saying that had you gotten out prior to finishing that service commitment, you wouldn't have qualified for the full benefit of the GI Bill. Can you more fully explain why that is?
Yes. So the GI Bill is incredible. I mean, it can pay so much money. Anybody who talks to me about joining the military, enlisted officer, whatever, I talk to them about the GI Bill. And I'm like, look, I don't care if you end up hating your job. It's not going to be that bad. They're going to pay you. You're going to learn lots of wonderful things. You can do lots of things for 4 years for this kind of benefit. I mean, you can write your ticket. But so with the GI Bill, before we get into how much money it is, just assume it's $1 million. What percent of that $1 million you get depends on how much time you spend on active duty. And for an officer in particular, it depends on how much time you spend on active duty after you have paid back your initial service commitment. And so what that means is if you were on scholarship for ROTC, that's all well and good. But if you have a 4-year commitment for ROTC, which is typically the case, or if you have a 5-year commitment because of the Air Force Academy, you don't actually start earning any of that GI Bill money until after that has already happened. So in theory, we'll say that you have an academy grad who does 5 years and hates his job, and he gets out right at 5 years, which is the case for a really close friend of mine that I'm still in touch with. He gets 0 GI Bill. On the other hand, you have another guy who does 5 years and 90 days, if that's just how it works out with his squadron. If he or she does 90 days after they've fulfilled that initial service commitment, it actually just increased. You get 50% of the post 9/11 GI Bill benefits. And so what that means is we'll say that the benefit is you get $2,000 a semester if you have 100% of the GI Bill, If you have 50%, you get $1,000 a semester. And if the book benefit is $1,000 a semester, then you get $500 a semester. And I have it pulled up here. We can, I'm sure, link to it in the episode. And it's not exactly a linear relationship, but at 90 days, you get 50%. And at 36 months, you get 100%. In fact, it's not linear at all. It doesn't make any sense. But there are certain thresholds where if you've been active duty after your initial service commitment for this amount of time, you get this percent of the GI Bill.
Yeah. The important thing to understand here is that if you take some of the government's money to do your bachelor's degree, you have to, quote, pay that money back through a active duty service commitment of 4 or 5 years, and then the clock starts after that service commitment is done to become eligible for the GI Bill. So if, as you were saying, after 90 days after you've completed your active duty service commitment, you now qualify for 50%. 36 months after you've completed your ADSC, you qualify for the full 100% GI Bill benefit.
Correct. And maybe we should talk about what does that mean? What is 100%? That's really important. Because like I said, I think the government probably paid $250,000 between, all my benefits. But it's going to depend on where you're going to school and that kind of thing.
Yeah. So it really does depend. Not all schools are equal. Not all schools cost the same amount. But whatever the cost is for you to go to that school or participate in that training program, and in this case, you can actually go get a certificate in welding or whatever and have the GI Bill pay for it.
Let me just talk a little bit about what is 100%, like what is the benefit. So there are two scenarios. You either go to a state program or you go to a private school. So the way that it's written, if you go to a state school, it pays for your tuition, period. That's the end of the sentence. It doesn't say up to a certain amount. It doesn't say if you're a STEM degree. If you are getting a degree at a state school, graduate, undergraduate, doesn't matter, it will pay 100% of the tuition. That's amazing. So if you're going to, I don't know how much Ohio State is up to now, but like Miami of Ohio is an incredibly expensive public school. But if you want to go there and get a degree, it's paid for, period. This is an officer podcast, so I guess most people would be looking at a graduate degree. But I'll just tell you, top law, actually even bad law schools, are over $50,000 a year now. If it is a state school, if University of Virginia state school is $55,000 a year, and you have 100% of the post 9/11 GI Bill, you did that 36 months after you paid back your service commitment, they're going to write a check for $55,000 a year for your tuition. So the difference being, this is where the percentage comes in. So we'll say that you only did 90 days, so you have 50%. It's still pretty good. You go to University of Virginia, and we'll say it's $50,000 a year. They're going to write a check for $25,000 a year, and you pay the difference. If you're on the GI Bill and you're going to a traditional school, there is, I think it's about $1,000 a semester book stipend. You get 50% of your book stipend.
And your housing allowance.
Yes. So the housing allowance, I'm glad you brought that up, is one of the greatest benefits of the GI Bill. The Montgomery GI Bill was great, especially when it was first implemented, but it's pennies on the dollar compared to the post 9/11 GI Bill for 95% of people. The old program, you just got a set amount of money. And if you went to a school that was like $3 a year, then you got to pocket money. There's no pocketing money with the post 9/11 GI Bill, but there's a lot more money on the table. So you qualify for a housing allowance. I think technically they call it something different, but it's equivalent to a staff sergeant with dependents, BAH, for the zip code in which the school is located. And so a staff sergeant with dependents who is in Cambridge, Massachusetts, I will just tell you right now is, it may have just gone up, but it's about $3,000 a month. As this isn't during the summers, it's only when classes are in session, and it's kind of goofy. They even prorate it like when there's a break between the semesters over the Christmas holiday. But as long as classes in session, I got $3,000 a month for a housing allowance. I got $1,000 a semester for books, and that came in, rain or shine. So that was an incredible benefit. So every year they're writing a check for $3,000 a month times 8 months that class is in session, and they're paying the tuition money directly to the school. So that's 100% of the benefit if you go to a public school. So if you decide that you're getting off active duty and you have the GI Bill and you want to go to a private school, the law is not written the same way. It doesn't say we'll pay any private school tuition, period. There's a cap, and right now it's around $20,000. We could look it up and see what it exactly is, but obviously that's a big difference, because if you want to go to medical school at the University of Michigan and it's $80,000 a year, that's a lot more than $20,000. And so with private schools there is a cap, and so there is definitely a benefit of going to a state school. But this is especially where the 100% versus 50% thing gets really important, and sometimes online it's kind of obscure to figure this out. But we'll say that you have 100% of the post 9/11 GI Bill. You want to go to a school, it's $50,000 a year. The cap is $20,000. That means you're on the hook for $30,000. But if you have 100% of the post 9/11 GI Bill, there's a thing called the Yellow Ribbon Program. And what that means is it's all on the school, whether they want to participate or not. But if they choose to participate, any amount of money that the school pays towards your tuition, the VA will match it. They will. It doesn't matter what you're going to school for, what your master's is. So with schools like Harvard, if they're $50,000 a year, the GI Bill pays $20,000. Many of those schools will pay whatever they have to pay to get it so that you don't have to cover any out-of-pocket expenses. And so what happened at Harvard is they set aside a ton of their endowment, and they said, we want to get veterans here. So if we accept a veteran and they have the post 9/11 GI Bill, we're all in on the Yellow Ribbon Program, and we will pay $15,000 a year. The VA matches the $15,000 a year. And I never saw a bill. No, that's not true. I saw a bill. I borrowed a book one time, and some books are on reserve for only 3 hours, and I turned it in after like 5 hours. They charged me like $1.50. I wasn't expecting that at all, but I had to pay that out of pocket. But I mean, it's incredible. I mean, average student debt coming out of Harvard Law School is probably, I don't know, a couple $100,000. That would probably be the average. I mean, lots and lots of money. And so all of my friends feel compelled to go to a big law firm that will pay them enough money so that they can afford a $3,000 a month, student loan payment. But the veterans, we felt kind of bad sometimes. We're like, this is crazy. Like, somebody is just paying for all of our stuff all the time. I mean, I knew an enlisted member when I was active duty who was separating. She was a staff sergeant. And she was saying she was going to make more money on the GI Bill than she was making active duty. And it may have actually been true. She was moving to San Francisco. She was going to live with her girlfriend or her roommate, I think. And, if you're splitting an apartment, even if it's in San Francisco, your BAH might be $3,800. And if you're living in a cheap place and you're splitting it, she might have been pocketing $2,200 a month or something. So just incredible opportunities there. But I guess I've talked a lot. But with the Yellow Ribbon Program, you can only qualify if you have 100%. So you can see the difference very quickly between, we'll say that you have 90% of the GI Bill and you go to a private school, you can't get the Yellow Ribbon Program. So you only get 90% of the $20,000 cap. And so it's a huge difference if you do that little bit of extra time and you get to 100% and you get the Yellow Ribbon Program. It could literally be hundreds of thousands of dollars difference.
Yeah, truly amazing stuff, what it is that we're able to qualify for if you do things right. If you don't sell yourself short, if you don't hit the separate button on an emotional low, and if you do a little bit of research, such as listening to this podcast or reading through the VA's website or checking into the actual law, as you have done, pulling up Cornell University Title 10 U.S. Code.
Dude, I'm telling you, if you put in the time, there are so many opportunities that are open up to you. I mean, there's the many graduate programs that are very competitive. I'm talking law school and medical school, and if you want to be a physical therapist or whatever. These programs, they want military members. They want people in the classroom who can say, like, yeah, well, I've been to Afghanistan, or yeah, I've had a mortgage, and let me tell you my experience in property law or whatever. They want those people in the classroom. And so even when it comes to admissions, don't write yourself off and think like, oh, well, my score isn't high enough or my GPA wasn't high enough. You are a member of a group that they want to recruit into their student body. And you would be surprised how different the metrics might be for a service member to be admitted to one of those programs. And then on top of that, because they want you, they're willing to pay the money through the yellow ribbon program. So it costs you almost nothing. So even if you hate your military experience, which I don't, I look back, there were definitely horrible experiences I had, but overall, I have zero regrets of my time in service. And had I not done it with the way that things worked out, I would have not gone to Harvard Law School. I wouldn't have gone anywhere close. It gave me time to mature. It gave me time to evaluate my options. I took the LSAT again. I took classes in a graduate program that helped me kind of stay in the academic world. Like, it did nothing but help me to spend that time in.
Yeah, I'm so glad you've taken the time to explain that to us, because it's so useful to think about the end from the beginning. People who are listening to this podcast, even if they're already an officer serving on active duty, like we kind of mentioned earlier, they're surrounded by people who haven't separated. And so they're not thinking about what the possibilities might be. And so you taking the time to kind of help us see what's possible on the back end, and that it's not necessarily that the grass is greener on the outside, but it's certainly not worse in some situations. Again, if you do things right, if you are educated, if you understand what the opportunities are and how to do them correctly, you can set yourself up for some real success, both developmentally, financially, career-wise. Everything can really work in your favor.
Oh, there is one more thing. I wanted to give a shout out about a program that I'm involved with called Service to School. So when I was looking at applying to law schools, I did a lot of research, and I found out that there are school admissions consultancies where you pay people to help you prepare your applications, which is like, I grew up in a super blue collar family, and that's not something that your parents do for you. But if you're in a different situation, you might pay for your kids. Well, you might pay for them to get on the crew team at USC or something, I guess. They look at your application, your statements and stuff like that, and they give you some ideas. But when I was doing this, I found a woman. I emailed her. I was like, how much do your services cost? What's the story? And she said, you know what? I take a handful of clients pro bono every year because it was her boyfriend or her husband is a senior Marine. Anyway, I was like, this is amazing. So she helped me, and she said, but look, if you help me, I want you to volunteer for this organization I'm starting. It's called Service to School. And so I recommend everybody check it out. If you're enlisted looking to go back to school after you get out, or if you're an officer and you're looking to go to dental school or medical school or law school, it's service2school.org. And it is a network of veterans who have applied to, been accepted to really top-notch programs, a lot of graduate programs and undergraduate schools, who help other veterans prep their packages. And it's awesome. I mean, we all think that we're good at this stuff because, like, I used to write my own EPR or OPR when I was on active duty. But what's funny is that's actually the problem, because once you become a volunteer and you've gone through training and you're evaluating people's applications, you see what they do is it's hard to get out of that military mindset. And so you copy and paste essentially your OPR bullets, and you try to write it back into English. The problem is you keep focusing on the wrong things. Like, I don't know why we care, but in the Air Force, it's always important how much the thing was worth that you did. So many resumes I see, they're like, oversaw $310 billion equipment transfer. And I'm like, what does that even mean? And why would they care? Like, really don't care how much it costs. Like, when you were on active duty, they did. They were like, wow, that's $1 billion with a B right there. This guy must be great. But when you're applying to school, they really don't care. What they want to see is, I was a leader and I counseled airmen on, their applications to undergraduate school, or I was a manager in this way, because those are the things that they want diversity in their classes. They have a lot of students that went straight through, they have no work experience. They don't care how many awards you got. They really don't care. They don't care that you're I got this Afghan veteran service medal. Like, they really don't care how many medals you got. They want to know what you did. And so anyway, Service to School is a program that they pair you with a mentor who has been through it. And these are people who went to Harvard, Yale, Stanford, Columbia, NYU Law School, and they're veterans. And they're telling you one-on-one, like, I read your resume, you need to change all of these red line edits. I read your personal statement, and if you tell me about this story that I've read 30 times, I don't want to read it, and I don't think they will either. And so they pair you with a mentor that gives you really great feedback. I've done this for probably 5 years now. And one of my great experiences was one of the guys that I mentored. He was accepted to Harvard Law School the year after me. So I don't know. It's a great experience. But the website itself has a lot of material. It's all free. You don't have to pay anything for it. They pair you with a mentor. Servicetoschool.org. I mean, one of the reasons I wanted to do this podcast is so that I could tell people, take advantage of it. I mean, it's incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing it with us. We'll definitely link that in the show notes so everybody can go check it out from there. Well, good. Matt, I've got a couple more questions for you. If someone wants to get in touch with you and pick your brain about, spacelift or the GI Bill or Harvard Law or anything like that, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
It would be great. I'm not trying to be like, oh, look at me, Mr. Fancy Pants with my Harvard email address, but I try to keep like all my law stuff and especially law school stuff going to that email. So it's mfolks@jd19.law.harvard.edu.
That sounds super official.
It's ridiculous. So, I mean, it's funny. I guess it's kind of impressive that I went to Harvard Law School, but we have really big classes of students. So you end up with lots of people with the same name. So we have these crazy long email addresses. I mean, you can look me up on LinkedIn or you can shoot me an email or whatever. I love doing this stuff. Like, really, I think long-term, I would love to work in a career services office at a law school or a dean of students office. Like, it's been such an important part of like my personal history. And I love helping people through the process. So I wouldn't mind fielding any questions at all.
Awesome. Yeah. And you're also active in our Facebook group. I've seen you engage in a few different discussion points there. So if the audience wants to join the Facebook group, they can definitely find you there and continue to pick your brain on these different topics. Awesome. So one last question for you, Matt. What does it mean to be an officer?
In my experience, I mean, reading books about leadership and stuff, like, those are good things. But really, it's about being a person that people want to work with and just being a good human. I mean, that sounds super vague, but there are lots of people that get caught up in like, well, an officer is, you're a leader in this way and you're supposed to do this thing. I mean, at the end of the day, the Air Force especially is full of really talented people from top to bottom. I mean, generals going down to the youngest airmen. Like I said, this guy that I mentioned earlier in the episode that I mentored a kid who's at boot camp right now. And I guarantee you his IQ and his ASVAB scores would be higher than 99% of the officers. I think in what it means to be an officer, I would hope that it takes a certain level of humility, because the people who didn't have that were not the officers that I wanted to work with. Like, I remember on active duty, it's really easy to buy into the hero worship of like, thank you for your service, or like, wow, this guy's an officer. And you never want to betray that trust and like downplay your role as an officer. I mean, at the end of the day, as an officer, you're expected to take responsibility. Like, the buck has to stop somewhere. And it should be whoever that last officer is in that chain of command. and you're going to get it. Somebody's going to get it. Doesn't mean you're smarter than the enlisted members who are working with you or for you, but you get paid more and you're going to be responsible for it. But like I said, it's easy to buy into the hero worship and be like, oh, well, the Air Force can send me wherever they want. And like, I worked this many hours. But I remember when I was on active duty, I was talking with a guy who actually outranked me, who was talking along those lines. He's like, I worked this many hours. And I shouldn't have said anything. But I was like, you know what? My dad works in a factory in southern Utah, and he worked 80 hours last week, and the air conditioner was broken. And it was, June in the desert. So like, it's great that you're working hard and you're doing these things, but like, everybody does an important job. So I think at the end of the day, an officer, you need to be, you're leading people. Like, it's not about the stuff. And it's easy to say like the mission is number one, and it is, but really your job is to oversee these people and take care of people and don't get too full of yourself. And so I don't know. I don't know what that really sums up to, but that's my take.
No, I like it. Definitely some very true points there. And on behalf of our audience, I want to say thank you for taking the time to share your experience, share your thoughts on service, on development, the many different programs and opportunities that are available to us officers, and the things that we can look forward to on the outside. All right, that was great conversation with Matt. I had a wonderful time talking with him, both about his time as a space operations officer from our episode last week, and now the continuation of that interview today with his experience using the GI Bill and transitioning into working toward a law degree. Really appreciate the approach that Matt had in gaining as much information and knowledge about the GI Bill and using that not only to his own benefit, but now being in a place where he is able to share that knowledge with others, especially our audience.
Yeah, from our previous episode, when we talked about how he was dealt a pretty lousy hand in not getting that form turned in, not getting an opportunity really to kind of pick his career field, but he approached that problem with an attitude of service. You can kind of see that even when things are going well and going his way, he still has that attitude, that desire to reach out and help others. And that's absolutely going to bless your life. If you are only out there living for you, you may find yourself alone. And he's found a way to turn his experience into something that can help other people. And that's just awesome. I really like that.
Yeah. And that's actually the thing that I wanted to highlight from this part of his interview is that mindset of giving back, paying it forward. He's the one who reached out to me with the desire to share this information with our audience. And I'm so grateful that he did. But beyond that, he's constantly working to help other people benefit from their time in the Air Force, either enlisted or officer, or through their transition and using the GI Bill. He just has that servant mindset and constantly seeking out opportunities to help other people be better.
Yeah, absolutely.
What are some things that you want to highlight out of this interview, Reed?
Something that he talked about that I really enjoyed was his approach to dealing with really challenging or unique opportunities that are available, but approaching them with the correct mindset of recognizing just how hard it is to get into some of these things. So last week, we talked about how important it is to try, like have an attitude, go ahead, swing for the fences, just give it a shot. But this week, I love how he kind of appropriately managed those expectations on some of these hard things. So he talked about the regional area specialist, foreign area officer, or the political military affairs strategist career field, the FAO, RAS, and PAS, whatever they're calling themselves these days. The names kind of rotate around, and how a lot of people really want to do those things. But he also mentioned how hard they are because a lot of people want to do them and they're very competitive. And having realistic expectations for who you are and what you can achieve is super important. it's important for leaders to give that feedback to their folks so they know where they are. But it's also really important, and we've talked about this numerous times, to be self-aware, to know where you stand. You know, some of these opportunities, they'll pick one or two from the whole Air Force to go do these things. Are you the number one or two guy or gal? Maybe you are. Maybe you're not. And just having a real expectation can kind of set you up for success. I'm not saying don't try, right? I'm thinking back to that Pursuit of Happiness scene with Will Smith and his son, where he's out playing basketball and his son's like, I'm going to be in the NBA. And the dad's like, nah, I don't want you spending all your time out here because you're probably not going to be all that good. You know, being very realist, right? Getting in the NBA is hard. But at the same time, his character is doing everything he can to break down barriers to be successful. And he realizes that he's killing his son's dream. So I don't want to be doing that. Dream big, you know, be all you can be. I mean that. Just weigh it appropriately and balance it with a little bit of realism so that you're not setting yourself up for failure. If you set your career success by achieving one of these incredibly competitive, highly limited, very small targets of opportunity, you may find yourself, quote, disappointed and a, quote, failure. And instead, center your career success on service, on other things that you can control. So that's just something I thought he brought out that, you know, it's kind of like one of those touchstones for me in my career. I can't define my career success by things I can't control.
Yeah. And then the thought that I had combining what I was saying about having a servant mindset and what you're saying about managing expectations reminds me of a concept called radical candor. Have you heard of this before?
I haven't. Enlighten me.
So radical candor was developed by Kim Scott. She wrote a book called Radical Candor that explains the idea of how you engage with other people and how you provide feedback to them. So imagine, if you will, two axes, one that describes your level of care for that person, whether it's high or low, and then the other axis is how you challenge them, whether it's direct or indirect. And again, that gives you those 4 different quadrants, and where you want to be is in that top right quadrant where you both care personally for that person, but you also challenge them directly. We often care about people personally, but we don't challenge them. And that puts us in a position of ruinous empathy, where we enable their ruin because we care about them, but we're unwilling to manage their expectations. We are unwilling to give them the hard facts of what's actually possible. Such as, if somebody is really interested in being a RAS, PAS, or FAO or whatever, and we know that they're never going to be able to do that, but we say, yeah, go get them. You'll be fantastic for that career field. And we don't ever say anything about how competitive it is or the process of applying. We just say, yeah, go get it. That's ruinous empathy and does not help that person develop further. Whereas the radical candor approach is where we not only care about them and their success, but we challenge them directly so that they can be effective. Hey, it looks like you're really excited about this FAO opportunity. Did you know that it's super competitive, that there's only a handful of officers that get selected for it each year? And by the way, these are the things that each of those officers have in common. If you want to do that, these are the steps that you have to take. And maybe the conversation with that person about it is, you're in the wrong career field. You will not get selected for it because your career field is not eligible, or the statistical probability that you'll get picked up is very, very, very low. But hey, there are these other opportunities that you would be really good at, and let me help you to achieve them, right? That's radical candor, is that not only do you care about the person's success, but you challenge them, that you direct them to something that is actually going to help them be successful.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And I wrote down in all caps and underlined it as I took notes on this this part of the interview. the importance of feedback. Even when it's not good, it's essential. Just this week, I had to sit down with a troop that I supervise and tell them I would not be pushing them for the next grade. And thankfully, that person was on the same page as I was. They knew they weren't ready, but I sweated this for a long time because it's not easy to tell someone, hey, you're not ready for promotion. But at the end of our discussion, they said, I was already feeling this way. I really appreciate the feedback. It's absolutely essential. So yeah, couldn't agree more. I like that idea of radical candor.
And I should say that's the name of the book. That's the name of the structure as Kim Scott initially developed it. And because it's become so popular, that's how people know it. But she has since backpedaled on the idea of radical candor and is more interested in calling it compassionate candor. And that's really what it should be.
No, I like that a lot. Awesome. Well, Colin, thanks so much again for working with Matt there to get that interview going. Really enjoyed that. And like we've mentioned a few times, the next episode you're going to hear from us will be a detailed look at a toolbox episode on the GI Bill. What an amazing benefit.
Yeah, absolutely. You do not want to miss that one, whether you are currently serving or someone who is anticipating trying to get into the Air Force. This is a benefit that you want to make sure that you understand in and out, whether for possible your own use or one of your loved ones.
Yeah, absolutely. I think about it, Colin. My dad used the GI Bill to get where he is today, and I'm a product of that. So yeah, massive, massive, important benefit. Glad we're going to talk about it. Anything else before we wrap up this week?
Nope, that'll be it. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Commission Ed.
Thank you for listening to Commission Ed, the Air Force Officer Podcast. The views and opinions of the authors expressed herein do not state or reflect those of the government and shall not be used for advertising or product endorsement purposes. Mention of any specific commercial products, process, or service by trade name, trademark, manufacturer, or otherwise does not necessarily constitute nor imply its endorsement, recommendation, or favoring by the U.S. government. The mention of companies by name is solely for the purpose of discussion and should not be implied as endorsement.